Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jim Brusselback, and tonight's class is all about taking those beginning steps of your DNA journey. Um, this class will be presented as a Zoom webinar. We will not be utilizing the chat or hand raise features. Please ask questions by clicking on the Q&A icon and typing your question or comment. The instructor, that's me, will answer questions at the end of this session. Also, if you are a Genealogy University student, please put your name in the Q&A and make sure you get credit for attending tonight. Thank you. So before we get started, I just want to take a minute to talk about some upcoming programs that we have going on in our department. The first is Beercember, a celebration of St. Louis brewing history. This program will take place on Friday, December 12th, 2025, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Clark Family Branch. It's open to adults 21 and over. Registration is required. The second program that I want to mention really quickly is basically a continuation of tonight's program with a different speaker, and it's called Next Steps in Genetic Genealogy, and it will take place on Wednesday, January 21st, 2026, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And registration is required for that one as well, although you do not have to be 21 for that one. Okay, so let's get started. The goal of this presentation is to give you some background info about the underlying biology of genetics, as well as some information on genetic testing and the companies available, plus some of the tools and resources available to genealogists. Again, this is just the beginning DNA class, which is meant to get you familiarized with some of the core concepts behind genetic genealogy. Um, and for those of you looking for more info, again, we do have that Next Steps in DNA class coming up in January, so be sure to check it out. So first off, we're just going to talk about some common misconceptions in DNA testing. The first one I hear a lot is that genetic genealogy is just for fun. And there can be a novelty aspect to it. But at the same time, it's also very serious. Like, for instance, maybe your family has some skeletons in the closet that they don't know about, or they don't want you to know about. And so that's just one of those things. So the reality is a DNA test can connect you to real living people who share DNA, who you share DNA with. It should be treated as any other piece of genealogical evidence. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to treat DNA evidence a little bit later in this presentation. So, common misconception number two, I think this is becoming a little less common nowadays, but still, I still keep it in my presentation here, is that women can't participate in genealogy testing, and that is false. Women can absolutely participate. Women can take several DNA tests. The only one that they cannot take is called Y-DNA test. And the reason they can't take it is because they don't have a Y chromosome. And while that is the case, if they were wanting to take a Y chromosome test or a Y-DNA test, they could rely on a brother or father or a close biological male relative to take one for you. Okay, so common misconception number three, um, the idea that um, you're going to get a detailed family tree. If it were that easy, it would put a lot of genealogists out of a job. Uh, what happens is most people will match with relatives who tested with your chosen company, and some names you may recognize, and some you probably won't. That's usually how it goes with these. So again, that last slide is false. Your DNA test will provide you with an ethnicity estimate, which we'll talk about later, and a list of genetic matches. Both of these are powerful tools, and I'll show you some of my own examples of this later on so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so another common misconception, your genetic family tree and your genealogical family tree are the same. This may or may not be an important concept, but I feel like it needs to be reiterated because there's a little bit of nuance going on. What you're looking at here in the picture is a genealogical family tree, specifically a fan chart. Now this, on the other hand, is a genetic family tree, and this is why they kind of differ. The genetic family tree is sort of this, it's more of a scattered starburst pattern. And the reason is because as you go back with generations of DNA, you're only getting fewer fewer chances of getting DNA from distant ancestors. So I like to think of it this way. Genealogical family trees are all inclusive and genetic family trees are not. So anyway, let's move on. Another misconception that I hear is that your ethnicity estimate should match your known genealogy. Um, the ethnicity estimates that these companies provide you is based on your genetics, and it's likely going to change for various reasons. So again, that one is false. The estimates you get, the estimates provided change over time to reflect greater accuracy, and that's why they're called estimates, really. Not only do those numbers change, but so do the groupings. So you have to be sure to pay attention to those kinds of changes. So in the example here, you can see a person's ethnicity breakdown has changed because of a website update. So again, these are just a couple of the misconceptions that I've heard over the years, and um, I just wanted to point out that they're false. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about biology here and switch gears. Uh, we're going to do a little grade school biology. You may be wondering why we're covering biology at all. And part of the reason is because I'm a bit of a nerd and I like learning about these things, so I hope you like learning about them too. Plus, I think it helps to have a little background information regarding biology when that way we're just a little more informed when we talk about DNA and things like that. Anyway, as you may recall from science classes, all animal cells have the same basic structure starting from the outside. There's a membrane, which functions as like a shell or a container. Going on a little bit further, you have this fluid called cytoplasm. And there's some structures in the cytoplasm that we care about called mitochondria. We're going to talk a little more about those later, but what we really care about tonight is the stuff further inside the cell's nucleus. So if we zoom in on that nucleus of a cell, it might look something like this. These little X-shaped things that you see inside the nucleus are called chromosomes, and they're made up of proteins. Humans have 23 chromosomes. More specifically, we have 22 chromosomes and one sex chromosome. And when I say these are tightly coiled thread-like structures, I really mean it. If we were able to unwind all 23 chromosomes and stretch them out from end to end, I think they'd be over about 6 feet long and possibly thin, but still kind of cool. Anyway, so if we were able to unwind a chromosome, and we would see that it consists of DNA, which consists of two chains that twist around in a double helix pattern. So what DNA does is it carries genetic instructions for development, functioning, growth, and reproduction. Now, zooming in, we can see base pairs make up the single steps in the DNA ladder, and they're called base pairs because they're made up of two bases. Never mind the names, you probably know them by the first letters, A, T, G, and C. Again, this isn't really relevant. This is just kind of a little bit of nerdy science stuff. If we go past that, this is where genes come in. So genes are regions of DNA, sometimes millions of base pairs long, and they encode data. Now, by comparison, a chromosome is billions of base pairs long. So you have the cell, a nucleus, a chromosome, DNA, and then a gene, which is just a segment of DNA or a region of DNA. Okay, so getting back to the genealogist perspective, the function of DNA is largely irrelevant. What we really care about is what percentage of DNA we share with others and where our DNA segments overlap. So how do we actually measure that? Well, that's a good question. Shared DNA is measured in terms of something called centimorgans, sometimes abbreviated as small c, capital M. And this text box is typical of what you'd see when you match DNA with someone online on a website. But what does it really mean? Let me show you an example. So in this example, um, you see a segment can be any length of within a particular gene. It just means that it's one continuous portion of the same gene. But in this example, you have two people who share 30 centimorgans over one segment on chromosome number 2. So what that means is that they very likely have the same genetic donor in that case. So at this point, you might be, kind of wondering, well, how do we get back to why are we doing this? Why should I get my DNA tested? And there are plenty of valid reasons to get your DNA tested. Just a few to mention here. You can verify your research. You can connect with distant cousins. You can add new branches of your family tree. And if you're really lucky, you can break through some brick walls. So there are three types of tests available. Autosomal is the most common one, and that's the one most commonly talked about. That's the one we'll be talking about most tonight. We will talk a little bit about the other two. Um, I, it, they're not as important, at least not for the in terms of this presentation. But I want you to at least be aware that these tests do exist, and yeah, I'll talk a little bit about them. So a little background on autosomal DNA. Humans have 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome, as I mentioned. And as the name suggests, autosomal DNA tests your autosomes. And that's inherited from both parents and can go back about 6 generations. Okay, so if you haven't done DNA testing before, this is probably where you should start. Um, should you test your autosomal DNA? And the answer is absolutely yes. Think of this as casting a wider net compared to the other DNA tests that I mentioned. Those other tests, they do have useful applications, um, but it's a little too advanced to get into for this class, I think, without, overwhelming you with some of the minute details. So just remember, yes, you should definitely test your autosomal first. Uh, so when it comes to testing your DNA, your ATDNA, companies essentially predict how you're related to someone based on your percentage of shared DNA. So in this example, me and Bambino share 196 centimorgans, and it appears to be that it's a 63% that he's my second cousin or a first cousin twice removed or something of that nature. That's what this particular slide is showing me. So this chart is more theoretical than actual, but it's the same idea that as you go back, you only get fractions of DNA from more distant cousins. So testing your DNA or your ATDNA does have limited range over time. That's one of the drawbacks. Okay, so as I mentioned, those two other tests, mtDNA. Um, let's talk about mtDNA for a minute. mtDNA is inherited from your mother's direct maternal line, and it goes back 52 generations, which is amazing. And the reason it does that is because mitochondrial DNA is outside of the nucleus and it does not mutate very often. So the way it gets transferred is different than chromosomal DNA. And that's the reason why it's so special. So getting back to mtDNA again and biology. If you remember that middle layer we were talking about, the cytoplasm, it contains numerous little organelles, little things called mitochondria. Mitochondria, by the way, are the powerhouses of the cell. And, I just have to mention that because I took biology in high school. And mitochondrial DNA is very short compared to chromosomal DNA. It's only about 16,000 letters long. And again, its location outside the nucleus is what makes it different from normal DNA, which is inside the nucleus. So, why don't males pass on their mtDNA? This was something I always wondered about for a long time, and I figured there was a complicated science question, but it's pretty straightforward. When a sperm fuses with an egg, the mitochondria stays attached to the sperm and dies off, whereas the fertilized egg just moves on without the without the mitochondrial DNA from the dad. So it's pretty straightforward. But again, yeah, just one of those little interesting science things that I like that I thought I'd share. So, should you test your mcDNA? One of the pros is that, let's see, although autosomal is more practical, mcDNA is another piece of the puzzle that is useful depending on your research needs. And it can help you determine a common maternal ancestor. Another pro is useful for adoptees. Researching adoptions can be really tricky. If you were adopted and you have the financial means to do the mtDNA test, it's a great tool to utilize. And let's see, yeah, okay. So one of the cons for mtDNA is that it's not great for determining exact relationships. Like it won't tell you this person's your grandmother or your mother for that matter. It's more something that confirms a lineage of a maternal line. Another drawback is it's kind of expensive. Um, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it's at least a couple $100 for the mtDNA test. And we'll talk about more about expenses and stuff like that a little bit later on. Okay, so moving on to Y-DNA. Uh, so Y-DNA is inhaled from your father's direct paternal line. It goes back about 20 generations. And let's see, it's males only because it's on the Y chromosome. And that's why females don't carry it. So again, with biology, you have the Y chromosome, which is just a little AI, but he plays a big role in genetics. So, should you test your Y-DNA? One of the pros is that it is useful for surname studies, since Y-DNA is passed down from father to son with a predictable rate of mutation. That makes Y-DNA useful for surname studies. And surname studies can be useful if you're stuck researching a common surname like Smith or Murphy or something like that. So, unlike mitochondria, one of the cons to DNA tests is that, let's see, unlike mitochondria, SMP tests can provide a ballpark time range, but Y-DNA tests can also get expensive over time. They're in the couple $100 range as well, I think, and there are several of them. Um, for more information on that, you'd have to talk to my one of my coworkers who knows a little bit more about these DNA tests than I do. Another con to the Y-DNA test is that you have to be male. Only males can be tested. If you're a female, if you're born with two X chromosomes, talk to your nearest male relative and see if they'll consider testing for you. Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the pros and cons of the test, we're going to talk about the companies available. There are five major companies available right now, available to genealogists, and they all are similar yet a little bit different. So when you're looking at companies, I usually tell people to ask big questions. How safe is your data? What are their credentials? Are there extra charges for premium services? Let's see. There is a company comparison sheet online that lists all these information in one convenient spot. Most importantly, it contains all of their contact information in one place. And I have that sheet in your handout. In your handout, I've given you a direct link to that handy little company comparison chart. It's highlighted in yellow. It should be in the middle of the page. You can't miss it. So you click on the link and it should bring you right there. But this is just a little small section of that page, and it's just a little company site comparison, and it shows you some of the differences in between the companies and how big their database is, how much they charge, things like that. And it's just kind of nice to have. So we're going to start out with the first company, 23andMe. Um, their database size is about is it 14 million? 1.4 million? 14 million. I like 23andMe because they cover the genealogical and health aspects of DNA testing. However, the company isn't doing all that well these days financially. So keep that in mind as we talk about these companies. 23andMe is probably not the best option to consider, but it's one that I chose back when they were doing well, so it's included in my presentation here. Okay, another company to look at is Ancestry. Ancestry DNA is the biggest database. Think they have about 23 million now. That makes them a very attractive option. And they go on sale around the holidays very often. So if you're looking for a DNA test to go on sale, I think Ancestry is running a sale right now about $30 or $40. So yeah, be sure to check them out. The next company is Family Tree DNA. Their database size is a little bit smaller, but they're the company that offers all three types of testing. They're a great company to test with, but their database size is, again, a little bit small compared to Ancestry. Another up-and-coming company is MyHeritage DNA. Recently, they were on sale for $39. Not sure if that's still going on, but again, watch for price drops with all of these companies, no matter who you test with, because they usually run sales. And the last one that I want to mention is called Living DNA. It's a very small database by comparison. It's only 300,000 people or so, but it's also very UK specific. So if you're like me and you're a generic white guy and you have a lot of UK ancestors, or you have a probability of having a lot of UK ancestors, it's probably worth checking out, at least in my opinion. Okay, so choosing a DNA test depends on your goals. Are you branching out? Are you tracing a surname? And it also depends on your lineage, like were you adopted? So, because every test can be useful in different ways. So, what's in a DNA kit? We've talked a lot. I talked a lot about them, or we've talked a little bit about them, but the kit itself is pretty straightforward. For example, in the picture here, you can see a MyHeritage DNA kit will include two cheek swabs, two vials of a preserved liquid, an activation card, a mailing envelope, and instructions. Now, if you test with a different company, their kit will likely look a little bit different. 23andMe, for example, does a saliva collection test instead of a cheek swab. So be sure to follow the instructions in the kit. That's the main thing. And typically, once you mail it in, you'll see your results in 6 to 8 weeks after mailing in your sample. So speaking of results, your results will depend on your test and the company. I'll show you some of my own results later on so you can see exactly just what I mean. Okay, analyzing your results. So analysis can be tricky, but it gets easier with the right tools and resources. So I'm going to cover some of the tools and resources available, uh, both on the internet and in our history and genealogy department. This is not meant to be all inclusive. It's just a few things that I want to point out. And yeah, again, these are just a few of the tools and resources. One of the things, one tool that you'll find online is called the Collins lead method, also known as clustering. Clustering your matches together by their relation to each other. Uh, Clustering means forming your matches together based on their relations to each other. This method was started in 2018 by a researcher named Dana Leeds, who was using a spreadsheet to color code DNA matches. Um, and it's nice because it gives you a visual representation of your data. Let me show you an example. It'll look something like this with this checkerboard pattern. And in this particular example, we have auto clustering because rather than having to learn the Collins-Leeds method, technology is taking care of that step for us. So instead of having just a list of your relatives, you can have those things arranged visually and see how people relate to you. So this is a tool that's available through MyHeritage DNA. If you test with another company like Ancestry, I'm not sure if they have an auto clustering feature or not. So again, that's one of the benefits of testing with different companies. So if you did a DNA test with Ancestry several years ago, I think this tool used to be called DNA Circles. Now, personally, I've not used it, so I can't say how useful it is, but I assume it functions the same way as other companies' products. Um, it's called Through Lines, and it illustrates uh, how you may be related to your DNA matches through a common ancestor. Okay, another tool that you should be aware of is the Shared Centimorgan Project. This chart is something you will see again and again when you're doing DNA research, especially if you're doing it in our department. It's something we refer to a lot. Um, and you'll see it again and again because it's basically a relationship predictor. Um, Relationships are largely based on your number of shared centimorgans, and this chart usually holds up pretty well. So if I share a certain number of centimorgans with someone, or if I know I share a certain amount of centimorgans with someone, I can look at that chart, and that chart will tell me what the likely relationship that person is to me. Okay, another tool that you should probably be aware of is one called DNA Painter. This is a tool that allows you to map segments of DNA to chromosomes to see which ancestors gave us which pieces of DNA. I know that's a mouthful. Okay, so here's how it works. Um, you compare your DNA to other people, other profile matches, and look for shared segments. From there, you fill in or paint matching segments and attribute them to ancestors. The underlying idea is that you, your sibling, and your cousin, if your sibling and your cousin all have a matching segment of DNA, you probably got it from a common ancestor. Okay, so another tool that I want people to be aware of is called GEDmatch. GEDmatch is a nice little website where you can compare results from other test takers who use other companies. So, for example, um, yeah, I'm sorry. So GEDmatch might sound familiar to some of you. Back in 2018, GEDmatch was used to identify the Golden State Killer. Um, while GEDmatch sounds promising, its website is harder to use compared to other testing companies. At least I think so. Um, I've used GEDmatch before, and it is true you can link to other people who use other tests, but it's not super user friendly in my opinion. So again, it's nice to know that it exists, and yeah. So another website or another tool worth mentioning, at least momentarily, is DNA.com. This is a website that allows users to download and compare DNA from multiple test sites. Um, but like GenMesh, it's not the easiest to use, and I think this one might be subscription based. So it's not one that I'd have a whole lot of information on. I would stick to GenMesh for that if you're interested in comparing DNA with other people from other companies. Okay, so one last tool that I want to mention is called Prometheus, and this is one of my guilty pleasures. Um, Prometheus is a sort of genetic health report. It can analyze your genetic markers and tell you certain things based on your genes. Um, for example, Prometheus analyzed my DNA results and could tell me that I'm very likely allergic to peanuts. And spoiler alert, yes, I am very allergic to peanuts. Apparently, it is written in my DNA somewhere. So again, Prometheus is just a really neat program because it has the ability to analyze DNA and tell you, hey, you might be at greater risk for disease XYZ. Now, these tools are not a legitimate substitute for medical advice provided by actual medical professionals, but the results are super interesting. At least I think so, and maybe something to discuss with your doctor. And so this is a good segue into my next slide, which is a word of caution, and that your DNA is your data. So I just want to say that you should be careful whom you entrust your data to. Your genetic data contains a lot of medical data about you because it literally is you. I'm not saying that you have to be paranoid or anything like that. It's good to be aware of how these companies are utilizing your data. Many companies are very explicit about their terms and conditions because they usually want to cover themselves legally. But I always encourage people to do their due diligence. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some resources here. One resource that I think everyone should be aware of, if you're not already, is called Family Search. They have um, a Family Search Wikipedia. Um, it's a huge resource, and if you're not using the Family Search Wikipedia, you're probably missing out. At least I feel like that's my opinion. So if you prefer reading and getting lost in various articles, this is a great place to go because you can literally just click on things. It's like a giant Wikipedia database. You just go from link to link and go down some rabbit holes or whatever. Another resource, if you prefer if you prefer watching videos to as opposed to reading texts, Roots Tech is probably going to be more up your alley as far as um, resources go. Roots Tech is an ongoing yearly conference sponsored by Family Search, and they host a series of live video presentations about DNA and genealogy topics. So if you're interested in certain DNA topics like for instance DNA painter, they have a whole 50-minute presentation just about that. So Roots Tech, definitely check that one out. The International Society of Genetic Genealogy, also known as ISOG or ISOGG. I'm not sure if they pronounce it ISOG. Um, I love this resource for all things DNA. Like Family Search, they are basically a Wikipedia database. It's an encyclopedia or directory, and they have tons of great information. So if you've never looked into them, be sure to check them out. Okay, so resources. If you're interested in the intersections of ethics and genetics and genealogy, you can find several resources online. This is just one example I found on the ISOGG wiki about ethics guidelines and standards. Again, they have thousands and thousands of articles to choose from. This is just one example. So, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned DNA citations a little bit, or citing DNA evidence. And when we think about citing DNA evidence, it's very similar to making, really, it's any other citation. There are lots of great templates out there, but all the citations really work the same basic way. You want to know the who, the what, the when, the where, and the wherein. That is to say, the author, the title, the date, the source, and the source details. So, as an example, I don't have Ancestry DNA yet, but let's pretend I did. Let's say that I matched with this person and I wanted to cite it. Here's an example of what the 5 elements of a citation would look like with author title, date, source, and details. In this case, um, my author was Ancestry DNA. My title was Member Matches for Jane Brusselback. Um, Ancestry DNA was the source, and then I gave the date and the details, and they're all in that little paragraph underneath the slide here. So I know I make it look easy, but it's not that hard. It's like doing citations in college or in high school. You just gotta put in that little bit of work if you need to make a citation, that is. So anyway, let's move on to some other resources. Uh, One that I've relied on heavily for tonight's presentation was this book by Blaine Bettinger. Um, it covers everything that I mentioned tonight, I think, and so much more. It's called The Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy by Blaine Bettinger. He's a very informative, and if you look up Blaine Bettinger and Roots Tech, which I mentioned a few slides ago, um, you will find he has a lot of videos because he works very closely with Family Search. So another great book by another popular author. This one is by Diane Sothard. It's called Your DNA Guide, the book. It's not a book that I use personally, but there is a lot of great information inside. Okay, another book to add to the reading list. This one's by Dan Elder, Research Like a Pro. And these are all books available at History and Genealogy, by the way. And this one's a genealogist guide to, let's see, to confirming ancestors with DNA evidence. This is one I have to add to my reading list. Okay, so the last thing I want to do tonight in this presentation is to give you an idea of what types of results you can expect from different DNA testing companies. I know some of you may have participated in St. Louis County Library's Genealogy University program these last few months and are testing with MyHeritage DNA. Unfortunately, I don't have a tour of MyHeritage DNA, but many of these websites, excuse me, many of these websites have features that are going to look and act very similarly, as we'll see. So we're going to start with a brief tour of Living Tree DNA. As I mentioned before, Living Tree DNA, our Living DNA is the smallest company with only about 300,000 users in their database, and that they are very UK specific. I tested with them because I'm pretty sure I have a lot of English and Irish ancestry, so I wanted to make sure I included them in my testing. So if we look at their homepage, it's not too helpful, but the stuff we want is over on the left-hand side of the screen. Right over where it says family matching. If we click on that link, we get an idea of how many people in this database I share DNA with. And their database is much smaller than others. I had a little over 300 matches, but let's say I click on Rebecca's profile. For example, if I click on one of my matches profiles, Living DNA brings up some tabs, and one is a little chart which tells me our likeliest relationship is based on the percentage of DNA we share. Yes. Okay, so depending on this other person's settings, you may also be able to see their DNA, how their DNA compares to yours. Not every user has this enabled. It's based on their privacy settings. But ideally, you can kind of compare your chromosomes to theirs. Let's see. Another thing you can do with the people is start a conversation. This conversation tab is one of the greatest tools you have at your disposal at this point. So start a dialogue with these people and see if you can figure out where your families overlap. If you can manage that step, and yes, it can be a big step, the next step is to see if they will compare your genealogy research with yours. So I suggest starting just a simple dialogue, just a simple direct approach, like, "Hello, cousin, I'm Jim. I'm searching for the surnames, Sullivan, Cohen, Ford, and Ryan. Do any of those names occur in your family tree?" Just really simple and direct. You might not get many replies, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt to try. Oh, and another nice thing about these profiles is they usually tell you how recently that person has been active. Okay, so if I go back to the home page and I click on the recent ancestry tab, I can find out my estimated ethnicity. So as you can see, um, The ethnic breakdown is a bit more granular in the UK region, really tying me to various counties in England. Now, the last time I gave this presentation, someone asked me about Ireland, and as you can see from this map, they don't break down Ireland the same way they break down England, unfortunately. Um, However, like I said, every testing company is a little bit different. Um, Living DNA doesn't give me details about Ireland, but another company might. Like, um, like I haven't tested with Ancestry, so I can't speak for Ancestry. They may give you more detail. So that was our first company. Moving on, we're going to go to Family Tree DNA. So this is Family Tree DNA's homepage after you log in. And as you can see with some of the main features, and I'm not particularly impressed with their layout, but it works. It's nice and straightforward, you know, straightforward and direct, and everything's right where it needs to be on the page. And what's really important are the tools and resources available. For example, if we clicked on Family Finder Matches, I can get a list of everyone in this company who shares DNA with me. In my case, that's almost 4,000 matches. This includes details about how much DNA we share, likely relationship range, and depending on the user, it may display other details such as their haplogroup information. I didn't really talk about haplogroups, but that's okay. So if I click on the My Origins button from the home screen, I would have gotten a visual map of a visual map representation of where my ancestors likely came from. And clicking on different things would give more information about these different groups. Notice how much more diverse this map says I am compared to the other ones. Yeah, because compared to the last map, I only had a few countries listed, and this one is telling me I'm almost a, a half of Europe, seems like. So that's just the way different tests are. You're going to get different results. Now, if I click on the chromosome painter button from the home screen, Family Tree DNA would show me a breakdown of my chromosomes and where they likely came from. This feature works similar to DNA Painter, similar to the Painter website I mentioned earlier. The difference being Family Tree DNA ties colors to nationalities, whereas DNA Painter ties it to ancestors. Okay, and the last company that we're going to talk about is 23andMe. And again, we'll see how DNA can yield different results. So here's 23andMe's homepage. A little cutesy, a little more cutesy than Family Tree DNA. It's also a little bit more health focused, but they also have lots of ancestry related information as well. And links to the top are what gets you around the sites. So we're going to click on that first link, and it's going to give me an ancestry report. And one of the things I like about 23andMe is that their ancestry report includes haplogroup information. I didn't really talk about haplogroups in this presentation, but haplogroups are just another piece of the genealogical puzzle that you can talk about later on, that we can talk about later on. But it's something used more in advanced DNA. Okay, haplogroups. Oh, so my haplogroups, and this is an example. Uh, my mtDNA is J1 and my yDNA is RZ30. Now those are just numbers and letters, I know. But again, as you delve into DNA genetic genealogy a little bit further, those things become a little more relevant. Okay, so much like family tree DNA, 23andMe has a DNA relative matching function. Interesting note, even though 23andMe has a 10 times bigger database size compared to family tree DNA, I had 2 times more matches on family tree DNA. However, my closer family members also tested there here, so that's just how it happens. If you're if you plan on having your whole family test, be sure that you all choose the same test so that you can compare your results more easily. Otherwise, you'll have to, use GEDmatch or a tool like that, which I mentioned earlier. So anyway, 23andMe also has a DNA painter that functions in the same way as Family Tree DNA, but the results again are going to be slightly different. And just like Family Tree DNA um, and Living DNA, 23andMe gives me an ancestry composition map that gives you a breakdown of your ethnicity estimates. And again, I have a broad European spectrum on this particular DNA test, which is strange because again, I've tested with 3 companies now, and I'm getting all these different results. So, a reminder: different sites will give you different results. Um, they all gave me a little something different. All of my tests give me a little something different. There are some interesting discrepancies between the maps. Both 23andMe and FTDNA say I'm around 60% British and Irish, although Living DNA says it's higher. Based on these maps, I could be around 14 or 20% Italian. Um, and the rest of me is just kind of up in the air. But what's interesting is that none of these highlight my German side, which is strange because my last name is Brusselback, and that is distinctly German. So maybe I'll test with Ancestry and get another result so I can add to this presentation. So which test is more accurate? As I explained before, these ethnicity estimates are just that. They're just estimates. If one sounds more correct to you, or your research points you in one direction over the other, that's likely the correct one. Not always, but likely. Health predisposition. So as I mentioned earlier, 23andMe is a little more health focused. The health predisposition report is interesting, but I would highly suggest consulting a doctor for more information about interpreting your personal results. For example, my results say I have a slightly increased risk for Alzheimer's, which is a little terrifying, let's be honest. But all this test is telling me is that I have a couple of genetic markers for Alzheimer's, not that I will essentially get it. So it's just one of those things. 23andMe will also tell you about your Neanderthal DNA if you have any. Apparently, I have more than most people, and maybe that's why I'm so thick-headed sometimes. So anyway, thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the class and that you found the information to be useful. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the next few minutes, and I will try to answer them. If you have further questions or comments, um, please feel free to contact History and Genealogy at 314-994-3300 or by email at genealogy@slcl.org. And once again, for any Genealogy University students, please be sure to put your name in the Q&A at some point to make sure you get credit for attending. And that is all I have. So thank you all and have a good evening. Stay warm. Oh, and let me check the Q&A before I... Oh, thank you, Liz Peterson, for correcting me. We have 46 chromosomes total, 23 in our ovaries, 23 in our sperm. Anonymous attendee had a question about how to get the handout. You can email our department at genealogy@slcl.org and just tell us that you need a handout, and we will send one out to you. Okay, it looks like Donnie had a question. Let's see. Keep getting updated places where ancestors from. Why is that? So your results, your updates are going to change over time. And I think that's the main thing that's going on here. I'm not sure exactly which site you're using, so it could just be something that goes on with that's going on with Ancestry or with MyHeritage DNA or whichever company you're using. But yes, your ethnicity estimates and things like that will change over time. Okay, Kathy asked, would it be smart to have my brother test with a different company than me for a possible wider range of matches? Yes, absolutely. Um, let's see. Depending on what companies you test with, like I said, different companies have different database sizes. So if you're testing with Ancestry and MyHeritage, I think those are two of the bigger ones right now. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good idea to sort of fish in a bigger pond if you can. So Donnie, it looks like you're on Ancestry. Yeah, I'm not sure what to tell you exactly. All I can say is that the algorithms that they use for these DNA tests are weird. Um, Sometimes your results change dramatically, and I'm not sure why exactly they change so dramatically. Okay, if no one else has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and go ahead and end tonight's presentation. Uh, so I hope you all have a good evening, and I will see you next time.